So it's really nice to chat with you because I caught your film back at Fantastic Fest, and I kind of
Awesome.
went to see it on like a late night screening kind of blindly, and I kind of fell in love with it, and I've been yammering about it to my friends ever since.
Oh my God. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Because my friends are like, "Oh yeah, I like horror films." I was like, "Wait till you see Mortuary Collection. Just trust me. Wait till you see this." Because like a lot of my friends are sort of into like horror stuff, and it's finding good horror is sort of hard to come by. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
and then when
I, it's, so-
oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I was going to say the it's wild because Fantastic Fest is a festival I've gone to almost every year for the
Yeah,
past 5 years. And it was so amazing to be able to premiere there. But my nerves were so like high because it's a film I worked on for so long. And
yeah.
I was just so like stressed out about the screening that I kind of don't really remember much about the experience of it all. It was just like, I was like, just make it through, which is, it's kind of a bummer because I've had some people say like, oh, I really enjoyed the screening. I'm like, I wish I could have like experienced it as well.
Well, the funny part is I saw you around a bunch of times, and I saw the burning babies in the press room like 100 times, and I was always curious about them. And then after I finally got to see the movie, it was kind of late in the fest. So I was like, "Crap! I would have liked to interview that guy. That movie was pretty good." And luckily, when the list came out for Fantasia, I was like, "Mortuary Collection." I was like, "Okay, I'm reviewing that, and I'm interviewing that guy because I freaking love that movie." So
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you.
I was like, "That's an easy thing for me." So with Mortuary Collection sort of screening virtually at Fantasia, being an independent filmmaker, I know I've written about this a bunch of times. What are your feelings personally on the virtualization of film festivals, both the pros and the cons from a filmmaker's perspective?
Uh,
That's a
it's
tough
tough.
one.
It's a tough one because I'm sort of split.
Yeah,
I think there's a big thing about independent films where you you kind of like this one in particular took me about 8 years of on again off again work to complete. And there's this feeling when you're making an independent movie, it's like you know you're not going to make any money off of it,
yeah,
but you kind of keep pushing forward because you know that when you get to sort of go to festivals and see it with your peers and meet other people who are making films and sort of talk to the audiences and see audiences experience the film, that kind of makes it all worth it.
yeah,
So, I mean, we were lucky that we got to do Fantastic Fest and a couple of other festivals right before the pandemic hit. But we had maybe 30 really great festivals all over the world lined up that I was going to go to. And every single, like one by one, as the pandemic became more and more real, they were like dropping off, canceling. And
wow,
we sort of ended up kind of sitting on the film for a year, um, which is a kind of a surreal experience. I mean, in many ways, I'm happy that I actually got a chance to finish the movie and screen it a couple of times because some
yeah,
people I know didn't even get to do that. But on the other side, it's like, oh, I'm missing the entire reason for making the film in the first place, which is to meet people and see people and talk face to face and sort of do that sort of thing because we're never going to make any money off of this thing. I mean, if anything, I'm very much in debt still from this movie. And so it's kind of like you definitely have some sort of deep, dark conversations with yourself, wondering why you're doing what you're doing. But then, you know, something like Fantasia comes along and people start watching it and you start hearing reviews because you kind of don't even know if the movie's that good yet because you've
yeah.
only seen it once or twice. And the reviews start to come out and it starts to sort of reaffirm uh, some of the reasons why you do it, even though you're not there to see it in person. You're still kind of, at least you know the movie's connecting with some people. And that's sort of been a nice experience. So, you know, with Fantasia in particular, I love that festival. So not being able to go to that festival like kills me.
Yeah.
But having anyone see the film at this point is sort of a treat.
Well, it's definitely one that plays, I think, better with the crowd.
Yeah.
So, of all genres to tackle, why do you choose the horror anthology? It's like it seems like it'd be an easy one, but it's a super hard nut to crack as far as I'm concerned.
It is. It's a really tricky one. I think I'm just a huge fan of anthologies. I grew up obsessed with the Twilight Zone. I was
Yeah,
a big wimp as a kid, and I couldn't really watch horror. I was really scared of it. But my dad sort of introduced me to the Twilight Zone, and we had most of the original series on VHS. So those are kind of my like safe horror. And I didn't even know I was a horror fan at the time. I would just watch those movies on repeat. And then, you know, as I got a little bit older, I started slipping into Tales from the Crypt. And then I was also a big reader, and I was just kind of obsessed with short stories, especially like I like Stephen King and Ray Bradbury and Richard Matheson after I started watching on Twilight Zone. And so a lot of it came from this sort of love for the short format,
Yeah.
and kind of feeling like there are these amazing short horror stories that need to be told, but there's not really a venue to tell them, because other than making a short film and doing some festival screenings or maybe, you know, short of the week or something, you don't really have, there's no venue for a general audience to see them. So I was kind of thinking, how can I take this love of the short format and kind of try to package it in a way that I can kind of sneak up on an audience with it and show them that the short format can be really cool, but still make them feel like they're kind of getting a feature film experience.
Well, it definitely seems like you've done your homework, because the film sort of breaks down into this meta deconstruction of the subgenre. And at first I was kind of sitting there like, yeah. And then the first one plays out, and then they do that discussion. I'm like, this guy's done his homework. I'm like, this is some impressive stuff here. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting that you say that, because I've been deconstructing the movie myself, like even recently, sort of kind of going back and thinking about like what it was that drove the film. And I remember that in the early days of sort of putting the film together, the question my producers kept asking me was, you know, what's the theme of the whole movie? What links it all together? Like, why are you telling the story? And I kept saying, like, I was telling the story because I love short stories. Yeah. I love shorts. And they were saying, well, shorts aren't real movies. And so in a weird way, the feature became about me defending the short format. And you sort of have these two characters at the center of the piece that kind of represent the two sides of my brain. So Montgomery is very much the old-fashioned classicist who loves morality tales, and he sort of sees the world through that lens. And then Sam kind of represents this like kind of new, like subvert expectations, kind of edgier filmmaker. And the two of them kind of sort of, you know, tit for tat over who's right and who's wrong. And I think at the end, it ends up being that they're both kind of right and they're both kind of wrong. And that's sort of like ideally what the movie should feel like for people, like something old, but something new.
Yeah, well, one of my biggest pet peeves in the whole horror anthology thing is consistency. And that's a really hard thing to do. And I want to know, how hard was it for you to write this thing and to make sure each story kind of fed into the other and each story kind of accentuated the other? Because you notice on my second time, there's a real flow to the stories and they all kind of match up. And you don't get that when you have different directors or different sort of people taking their hands on the stories. What was that like for you to write all those and sort of make sure they all gelled together at the end?
I mean, honestly, it was almost an exhaustive process of talking about these very things you're talking about and over talking about them and sort of going right down these rabbit holes and thinking a lot about how audiences would experience the movie. And so we would sort of started off with the really short one, because we wanted to show people really quickly like what to sort of set a tone. Like, how can we set the tone, but do it in a very concise way, because otherwise this movie is going to be like 2.5 hours long. So the first one was kind of designed just to be almost like a cold open for a movie. And then we knew with the next two segments, we kind of had some more time, because the audience would be hopefully would be a little bit more accepting of like character development and sort of a slower pacing. And but then we also knew that as the movie continued on, audiences were going to sort of get a little bit more impatient, and so we were going to have to condense it down. So in a weird way, the individual segments kind of are structured like acts in a feature, in which the Babysitter Murders, which is the last one, is like almost like one massive climax scene. It's like basically a fight scene from beginning to end, and that was sort of specifically put there so that hopefully we could kind of get ahead of audiences and not have them feel that feeling that I'm sure we all feel with Anthology sometimes. Like, the worst thing you want is an audience to be like rolling their eyes like, another one? Oh,
Now, this is something I noticed watching it the second time. there's a surprising amount of world building in this. Like, you introduce a lot of stuff with Raven's End. Can you tell us a little bit more about Raven's End and like where it's sort of like going? Like, what's your sort of idea with it? Because you introduce all these little elements, and I was watching it, I was like, wait a minute, that's really cool. What's going on with that? What's going on there? And then we stop at the mortuary.
Yeah, it was. I think in the early days, when I first moved to LA, one of my biggest things was I was sort of chasing after these anthology properties. Like,
Okay.
oh, what's going on with Tales from the Crypt? What's going on with Creepshow? What's going on with Eerie? What's going on with Creepy? Like, can I get a hold of any of these? And everybody was basically saying like, those are huge IPs. You're a no-name filmmaker. You can't touch those. And at the time, people were even saying like, those are never. No one's ever gonna do anything with those. They're dead. And so what I sort of did with this one, I was like, well, maybe if I can make a feature that people like, I can kind of create my own IP, and then sort of use that IP to do a series and sort of explore like, you know, dozens of stories, several episodes. And so I think Raven's End kind of became the sort of the center, the eye of the storm for all of that. And so as we were sort of moving through it and as we were designing the elements, we were like, let's put in little clues to other stories that are happening, so people know this is like a Derry, Maine, or this is like a sort of any sort of Stephen King town, where if you look in any sort of dark corner or under any mattress, you're going to find a trapdoor, you're going to find a tentacle monster, you're going to find some other story that's happening. And then another part of it is that we had some stories that I wanted to put in the movie that we ended up omitting, or we had to switch out for others. And so as sort of an homage to those lost stories, I put sort of little clues as to how they're still happening in the town. The tricky part though was, you know, one of the things that I think is kind of a bummer about a lot of anthologies is there's not a lot of connective tissues between the different threads. So in the original draft of the script, there was probably a million different little like reappearing characters, ideas, threads, things on TVs, newspapers, all this was happening at the same time. But when we found the reality of sort of producing something like this on an independent budget, is that those sort of things are impossible to do, because, you know, we shot a piece of this in Oregon, and I was like, oh, let's have the police officers come up here for this one line. And they're like, well, if you want to bring those two police officers to Oregon, you're going to have to put them up. You're going to have to pay SAG wages. You're going to have to give them per diem. And it was like $4,000 a person just to have them come up for one line. So then it became like, all right, let's think of other ways that we can cleverly kind of intertwine these stories without. And so sometimes that meant coming back to LA, getting an actor, and just me and my producer and a camera and a fog machine shooting a piece, plugging it in, and kind of trying to build it as much as possible with, you know, no money.
Well, it definitely feels like everything fits together. And it's weird because I even mentioned this in my review. I felt like it was almost like a backdoor pilot. Like it would work as a good sort of like intro to like maybe your version of Creepshow or your version of Tales from the Crypt or something. Like I would watch this on Netflix. Like I would definitely watch it.
I would kill for it to be on Netflix. Thank you, dude. I would kill for that. I think that's the ultimate dream. I mean, I think the challenges of an anthology format are great. The biggest thing that we sort of realized is that, you know, from a storytelling perspective, when you do one feature, one story, you kind of have, they're almost like these key moments in the story that if you can knock those 5 beats out of the park, the movie will work. Like if you have a good intro, if you have a good turning point, if you have a good climax, if you kind of nail those specific parts, an audience will usually walk away like, hey, that was an enjoyable experience. But what we didn't really anticipate for this movie is that we had to do those 5 things 5 unique times. And we couldn't and if one of them was to sort of just, if we were to drop the ball even in one story, the whole thing would have kind of crumbled like a sort of house of cards. So that ended up being a really tricky process, both in the writing and also in post, to make sure that we like really hitting and nailing at least those key moments for each story.
So I love the banter between Sam and Montgomery in the film, which also feeds into the themes and the ending of the movie, which are thankfully really progressive. Do you think horror as a genre needs to work on attempting what you're doing here, which is empowering female protagonists and antagonists?
Yes, I mean, I think obviously, what's interesting is I think going into it, I didn't really set out to make that such a strong component of the movie. I mean, I believe in that personally, like as a person.
Yeah.
But I wasn't setting out to make a movie that was sort of teaching lessons or sort of exploring those avenues. But what I was doing is I was sort of thinking about conventions in horror and trying to turn them on their head. And the sort of unintentional result by taking conventions and turning them on his head was a progressive movie. Because it almost like even further underscored how backwards some of the ideas that we all have as horror fans are about, like, you know, female protagonists, you know, victims, and that ended up being sort of a big component for the final story, obviously. Where it was like, I was surprised at how baked in our ideas for gender roles were, that segment even surprised some people, because I remember when we shot that movie, we would shoot it like a few different ways. We would do like some scenes and I'd have the actress would say, okay, play it damsel in distress, play it sort of in the middle, and then play it pure evil. And then in the editing room, we can kind of calibrate how dark or light we want you to be. And at the end of the day, we used all the darkest takes from her. We just went full villain, and it still didn't change people's minds. People still were so firmly
don't
set.
expect it. And it still hits so hard, and she's really great in it too. How did you, like, I mean, you worked with her in the Babysitter Murders, but like, was this always like your intention to work with her again in this?
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember. I've written so many different versions of the wraparound story in particular. Yes, yeah, it was. Even when we made the Babysitter Murders, because the feature came first, and then we basically pulled one segment out and did a Kickstarter and made this short as a proof of concept, always intending to sort of bring her back as the main character in the story. And that was sort of one of the tricky parts about the Babysitter Murders, which is like, because that short plays as a climax, there's not almost any room for character development.
Yeah.
So the way it was originally written is the feature was the character development, and then the segment was the climax. But when we just had the story, we had to work really hard to kind of try to make it feel like a fully fleshed out story with hopefully a character that people could empathize with, even though we didn't have, you know, that hour and a half pre-lap to sort of get to know her.
Yeah, luckily I saw that on one of my last days at Fantastic Fest. So I was kind of brain dead when I saw it, so I didn't exactly remember it. So when I watched it again, I was just like, wow, that's awesome. That's a good ending still. I'm like, yeah, it still works. I was like, still surprised. I'm like, yeah, it still hits.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I love her chemistry with Montgomery. I love how the back and forth. Now my question, I mean, of course, do you want to do a sequel? Is that like do you have another project lined up? Like, what's next for you?
I mean, I would love to do a sequel. I'm not sure how realistic it is, just because of the strange thing about a movie like this is that fans seem to really respond to them, but studios or even bigger production companies, they don't know how to market anthologies yet.
Yeah.
It actually would have made more sense to write this as a series. That probably actually would have been easier sell than writing it as a feature. And I think I kind of, when it started, I went into it with this like naive, like people were saying, don't do an anthology movie. You cannot get them made. And I was like, well, now I want to do it even more. Like, that's all the more reason to do it, because if you can't get good ones made, then it's going to stand out if you can.
Yeah.
But even I, like, when we got to the end of it and it was done and we were like, we love this movie, we're very proud of it, let's get it out there. Even then, it was extremely difficult to get. Everyone was wary of it. Buyers were sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And it was a tough sell. So as much as I would love to sort of turn this into an ongoing series of prequels and sequels and really explore the town of Raven's End, I don't know how to find somebody who would actually invest in it.
I mean, do you have distribution for it yet? Can you say
anything
about that?
Yeah. I'm very unclear if this is official if I'm allowed to talk about this or not, but I've said it publicly anyway, so it doesn't matter. But we licensed it to Shudder.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it is perfect. I'm so excited. We licensed it to Shudder not long after Fantastic Fest, actually, which has been, and sort of, again, that goes back to, they were saying like, oh, we want to save it for our October release, which was exciting at the time because we're like, oh, we're going to do all these festivals and then we're going to release it in October. But now it's just been sitting on it, and the time sitting on it has felt extended up because we're not doing anything. We're just like,
and you don't have that build up of people like kind of like chomping at the bit to see it. But
yeah, we sort of have Fantasia's the first like festival that Shudder has agreed to like put it into digitally and like start getting the buzz going. But it's going to be, I mean, this is my first time doing any of this. I'm a shorts guy through and through. So every new step of the way is an experience. On top of that, with the COVID thing happening, it's everyone's first time. So it's a double question mark.
Hopefully that'll give you some like momentum to actually them to pick it up or them to do something else with the property.
I would love that. I mean, I don't know if it would be, I think they have that Creep Show, which is probably in direct competition.
But I mean, like they're always, I think, trying new things and open to new content. So I don't see why they wouldn't try something else with this. If the response, I think, was strong enough to it, you never know.
I don't know. That's the thing. It's like a big waiting. We're still waiting to figure it out.
Because we're all kind of locked in our homes right now, and Shudder is all we got for this sort of thing now. This is our only venue.
That's true.
I know, like they kind of cornered the market on good horror lately. They did that one online movie that's just
Host.
Yeah,
it's awesome. Yeah, I've been watching everything that they've been releasing. It's funny because initially, sort of like the golden goose is Netflix, because for a lot of filmmakers, because you can tell your grandma watch it and she has Netflix. And so Shudder, when we first like signed up with Shudder, I was a little bit like, I love Shudder personally, but does anyone I know have Shudder? But now Shudder must be crushing right now because they're getting great stuff. Yeah. Everyone's at home. It's almost an ideal time to sort of be releasing on Shudder, even though I would trade anything for there not to be a pandemic.
I'm excited that like I can finally tell people when to check it out. So what's your next project? Like what's next in the pipeline for you?
So I did you watch any of the that Sam Raimi series on Quibi?
I did.
You did watch it?
Yeah, I actually did, and I actually gave it a good review because I think some people forget Sam Raimi is very sort of slapsticky. Mm-hmm. And I think they watch it and they're like, oh my God, this is terrible because he's making a joke. But that's Sam Raimi. That's Evil Dead 2 Sam Raimi. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And I think the format itself is also, I think Sam Raimi was kind of going into it with a little bit like, oh, this is a weird format. Let's just be super weird with it. So yeah, I wrote and directed an episode of that series.
Cool.
And then I'm working with them on another project, but I'm not sure. Just the pandemic has put us all in these unprecedented times, and it's like it's hurting people. Did you watch all the episodes? Did you watch all 5 episodes?
No, I watched all the Raimi stuff.
Oh. Well, if you get a chance, you should check it out. It's a not bad series. I think you can still get a free 15 days or something on Quibi. Yeah. If you watch it, I did the 3rd episode called Scared Stiff.
Okay.
It's very much in the tone of the Mortuary Collection, which is why.
Now definitely check it out.
But yeah, I'm writing another project right now with my writing partner, and we're sort of, the worry is that you kind of put everything into a movie with this sort of idea that this movie will like then sort of take you to the next step.
Yeah.
And so I think myself and a lot of my filmmaker friends or people who have made their first movies are now wondering if we are going to be able to take that next step because of this sort of delay in the system, or if we're going to be going back to square one. So we're kind of feeling it out and hoping that our movies still allow us to sort of to make another movie. I mean, that's ultimately the goal.
I mean, it's brought big Hollywood to a grinding halt. I mean, Nolan's doing like trying to do his thing, and people are like,
yeah.
I mean, if Nolan can't get it done, then no.
I know. That's so true.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for this. It's really cool.
Thank you. Have a great day, and let me know what you think when you read the review.
I will, absolutely. Thank you so much, dude. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.